Blunt Post.
Good morning and welcome to the Blunt Post with Vic on KPFK. I'm your host, Vic Gerami, the editor and publisher of the Blunt Post, and I'm thrilled to be with you today on this beautiful Monday morning. I hope you had a good weekend and are ready for another exciting and unpredictable week of developments in the country, especially in D.C., and of course, our presidential race. If you've never heard the Blunt Post with Vic, my show is about covering national breaking and headline news, analysis, commentary, and I also interview high-profile elected officials, dignitaries, and other headline makers. For today's show, I interviewed California Congressman Ted Lieu, which is coming up shortly, as well as we're going to air clips of my interview with then presidential candidate Marianne Williamson. The Blunt Post is also about featuring and celebrating extraordinary individuals, public servants, activists, community leaders, and organizations. It's about recognizing and focusing on exceptional achievements and hopefully inspiring our listeners. But before we go any further, I'd like to dedicate today's show to Lila Garrett and pay tribute to her honor. Lila passed away on February 1st. She was a longtime and beloved host of Connect the Dots on KPFK, a powerful force in journalism, and a crusader in democratic causes. Lila was an Emmy Award-winning television screenwriter with a passion for politics and was a regular contributor to LA Progressive. She was born in 1925. Lila was a comedy writer and began her career writing questions for game shows, including The Second 100 Years, My Favorite Martian, All in the Family, and Bewitched. Lila won 2 Emmy Awards for 90-minute comedies, Mother of the Bride and The Girl Who Wouldn't Lose, the movie The Way We Were, starring Barbra Streisand, and reportedly, it was written about Lila Garrett. Lila was also the president of the Los Angeles chapter of the Americans for Democratic Action, founded by Eleanor Roosevelt. And for many years, she was the member of the Progressive Democrats of America. And we at the Blunt Post with Vic have put together a tribute clip, so take a listen.
Take over the Democratic Party and return it to the people. They have failed us miserably. And that is the subject I would like to discuss with you today. A perfect distraction for activating the list of destruction. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that you, me, we the people are being manipulated into keeping our eyes squarely off the ball.
Never existed a world where the truth will not be resisted.
I'm Lila Garrett.
We thank Lila for her enormous contribution to KPFK, to journalism, and to democracy. Lila left an enduring legacy, not just with KPFK, but in our community, and will be greatly missed. Well, that was a great clip, very apropos and authentically Lila. So let's discuss some national headline news, international, I should say, considering the coronavirus happens to be on top of everyone's mind around the globe. It has so far caused the death of 19 people in the U.S., and about 30 states have confirmed that they are affected by the coronavirus. Internationally, the coronavirus has killed over 3,500 people and has infected over 105,000. At least 8 U.S. states have declared a state of emergency. So the members of President Trump's coronavirus task force yesterday tried to sort of fan out the controversy and all the talk about how badly the administration has been handling this, and it was even a bigger disaster. They had a press conference but they could not get themselves to really be organized and have some solid answers for people. So the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, Ben Carson, and Surgeon General Jerome Adams basically stumbled and deflected during this press conference and could not really have a straight answer for the members of the press. They were unable or unwilling to answer questions. And according to the Associated Press, the White House overruled health officials who wanted to recommend the elderly and physically fragile Americans that they should be advised not to fly on commercial airlines because of the new coronavirus. And this is according to the Associated Press. So, of course, the White House denies this, and the ban plays on. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention submitted the plan this last week, as a way of trying to control the virus. But White House officials ordered the air travel recommendations to be removed. Someone from CDC has made that claim, who has direct knowledge of it. The Trump administration officials have since suggested certain people should not consider traveling, but they have not stopped short of stronger guidance sought by the CDC. So basically, we're sort of like in this state of unknown with what's going on with the coronavirus from the top down. I'm sure a lot of you have no confidence in this administration. And so, we all have to sort of take care of ourselves and inform ourselves and educate ourselves and take all the measures that we can and hope for the best and wait until they figure this out, since our president has more pressing matters to address, like tweeting. We'll see. Okay, so now for the election and the Democratic candidates. It's been a roller coaster. A lot has happened, and especially in the last week or so. The word surprise keeps coming into my head, because every time one of the candidates suspends their campaign, it's a huge surprise to me. And I guess it's a good thing because, to me, most of them have been very, very qualified to be president. Of course, pretty much anyone is compared to what we have in the office. So, that surprise started with Senator Harris when she suspended her campaign. I did not see that coming. And, it's kind of weird. Even whether I was going to ultimately vote for her or not, it still feels weird because someone very qualified drops out. So, and then, of course, that continued. It continued with Marianne Williamson, whom I interviewed, and you will hear some excerpts from that interview later on. I admire Marianne Williamson a great deal. And then there was Pete Buttigieg, who came out of nowhere for most of us on a national level and did so well. So at times there was an actual sort of hope that he could make it. And then he suspended his campaign, and that was a surprise. Followed by Michael Bloomberg, whose campaign I think lasted just over 2 months. He spent over $500 million of his own money. And I do really appreciate what he said when he was suspending his campaign. And that is that he said, "Today I am leaving the race for the same reason I got into it, and that's to defeat Donald Trump. Because it is clear to me that staying in the race would make achieving that goal more difficult." So I honor that about Mayor Bloomberg. I don't know. I thought when he first joined the race, I thought he wanted to galvanize people and then give his support to someone else. And then at times I thought, well, maybe he actually does want to be president. I don't know the answer to that. Either way, he was another great addition to the race. And of course, the last person that surprised me was Senator Warren, another super qualified person who suspended her campaign. That was a little bit sad to see her go. So there we are. I mean, we are in this, basically, let's get blunt, it's now between Senator Sanders and Vice President Biden. What we have is Joe Biden has had the endorsements of Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Michael Bloomberg. while Bernie Sanders has had the endorsements of Marianne Williamson and this past weekend, Reverend Jesse Jackson. I think everyone is waiting to see who Senator Warren is going to endorse. So that would be an important one. But it's been a very interesting presidential campaign so far. Super Tuesday was definitely a Super Tuesday with a capital S. It was not what most of us, I think, expected. Of course, Joe Biden did a lot better than we thought he would do, but it's not over yet for a while, so we will keep you updated. Let's get blunt here. This is not the time to be undecided. I mean, if you are undecided, and I know that most of our listeners are not undecided, but for those across the country who are, I can't fathom someone being undecided, because if it's a matter of who in the Democratic Party, which one of the candidates should get the nomination, and we know that any one of them is far more qualified than who we have in the office. So really, honestly, this is a matter of, do we really want 4 more disastrous years of Trump and his what's referred to as an administration, although it doesn't act like it. So, we really, truly, it's cliche, and we've said it before, and we're going to keep saying, is this is when we all come together and we put our differences aside, and no matter who our nominee is, we vote blue no matter who, and we keep to that. That's what needs to happen. So there it is. Let's get blunt. As far back as I remember, I've looked to quotes and slogans and just all types of wisdom for inspiration, sometimes to get me through tough times. And, I have so many favorites that I go back to all the time, from Emerson to Dr. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, Desmond Tutu, and Elie Wiesel. So today, of all things, I want to tell you a slogan from 12 Steps that really applies to a lot of things, but especially to today's political climate and crisis, I should say. And that is, the slogan is, if nothing changes, nothing changes. That says a lot. It's used in 12 Steps, it's used for people who, for lack of a better way of explaining, are tore up from the floor up, are sort of self-destructed by substance abuse and other things, and they are unwilling to change their ways, their methods, their way of doing things, and yet they expect different results. So those who have been in the program for a long time will turn to them and say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So here we are in a political climate where a lot of people have been working very hard to change things and change from the establishment politics. And we're sort of still seeing this develop. And that brings me to Marianne Williamson, who is definitely a change maker, a maverick in what she does. I have been a fan of Marianne Williamson for many years. I've gone to her lectures, I've read her books, and I was very enthusiastic about her candidacy. And I was privileged, I should say, to interview her about a week or 10 days before she suspended her campaign. And I want to play some clips from that interview. We did it right here at the KPFK studios. She talks about the change and about the difficulty of changing institutionalized ways of doing things and what she calls the campaign industrial complex. So take a listen. So Marianne, I just want to ask you sort of broadly, what do you think about the campaign so far?
It's been an exhilarating experience and a brutal one, both. I find actually talking to people, to voters, about the state of our country, where we've been and where we need to go, very moving, very poignant, and very hopeful. But then there is another universe out there, another political universe. That's what I call the campaign industrial complex.
Like that.
And that includes the political establishment. It includes the media that is involved with it. It includes such things as the DNC, the polling, the money, the pundits. And that, if anything, is a suppressant to democracy. It is a manipulation rather than a facilitation of the democratic process. I've experienced firsthand and personally how that system resists anyone coming in to have a different conversation than the pre-prescribed one permitted. And the tension between those two universes, the gap between those two universes is concerning to me as an American and potentially tragic for our country.
Of course, we always know that women are held to different standards, too, in politics. So I've seen a lot of that, too, that's played out.
Well, I think you are being charitable in your assessment. This was not just being, I know in my case, this was not just about being held to a different standard. This was about being proactively vilified and demonized.
Right.
So, and in terms of anyone coming from the outside, such as you saw this with Andrew Yang, you saw it with myself, given much less time on the debate stage, and then cast out, literally, if, in fact, you're saying things that the prescribed powers don't approve of. But I think that what you said is very significant. We don't name it something like campaign industrial complex, but then when someone does name it, you go, right. It's so true. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business. That's not what our democracy is supposed to be. Our democracy is not supposed to be a multi-billion-dollar business.
Right.
It is supposed to be about the collective conscience and will of the American people, no matter who we are, whether we're rich or whether we're poor, whether we're black, white, gay, straight, man, woman. The profundity of the ideal is that there's a wisdom in you and 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 a wisdom in me that should have nothing to do with where we've come from, what we do, who we are, but that has to do with our collective conscience and our own deep-seated wisdom about where the country should go. Now, I feel on this campaign, I have touched that place. I've had the honor and the privilege of being around voters and seeing what I've seen from my career for 35 years, which is that people are good, people are noble, people are smart, if we would just allow that to play itself out. But it's being stifled. The will of the people is literally being stifled, and it's being stifled through manipulation. It's not just, when we think of voter suppression, we think of the obvious ways that voter suppression occurs, and it does, and that's very concerning. But what I've seen on this campaign is that it's not just outright voter suppression, it's voter manipulation by creating narratives about people, false narratives that keep getting repeated and repeated and repeated, smears, propaganda weapons.
Right.
Even the whole idea, by the way, of an outsider candidate. We should ask ourselves, outside what?
Exactly.
Outside what? In America, theoretically, there is no outside or inside. We're all equal. And theoretically, your wisdom is no less, more or less important than the wisdom of someone who is a business person or the wisdom of someone who, for that matter, is a congressperson. But our problem today is not a lack of political mechanics. Our problem today is a lack of political vision. It's not that we don't have anyone who knows how to drive the car. It's that we're on the wrong road. Now, Americans need to think very deeply about that because we have allowed ourselves to be lured into a situation where basically we're just observing what they're doing, even though at this point, in this moment, we know we're witnessing a slow-moving car crash.
Right. And it's been obviously happening for 3 years. And we're trying to change that. We're trying to...
Are we?
I hope so. I'd like to think so.
Well, I think we need to really ask ourselves what we mean by that and ask ourselves what we're doing. Because what happened in the last election was that the DNC put their finger on the scale I personally think that if they had not done that, then in the primaries, either Hillary would have won or Bernie would have won. But I think we would have all felt good about it, and I don't think Trump would be president today. And this time, they're doing something very similar. But they're not saying it has to be this one person, but it basically has to be people in their crowd. They make it too difficult through polling, through money, through all of these ways. It's very difficult to get in there and to stay in there. And they have ways through, and it's not is it the DNC? It's the whole matrix.
Right.
It's media. It's a mindset. And I had, before this campaign, here we are at KPFK. I'm an old style lefty. I thought a lot of these shenanigans only happened on the right against us. And my eyes have been opened. I am no longer naive about these things. I'd always heard the expression that the left is a circular firing squad. But I never saw it until I myself was in the center of that firing squad.
Yeah, I echo that because someone told me years ago that there's no such thing as liberal media, that media by design can't be liberal because they're for money, they're to make money. Sure, certain networks are less conservative and less biased than others, but overall, corporate media is generating part of the narrative.
Well, what you're saying is correct, but I think there's something that goes further than that. Even so-called progressive media, we've got a really, really, really big issue here. And that is forces of authoritarianism, global authoritarianism, and neo-fascism are literally standing at our door. This is so not the time to be shutting anyone up who's speaking anything close to a progressive message.
We've been talking about how the establishment, the political and the campaign industrial complex has been sort of engineered to sort of have like this popular kids group and shut out anyone that has a different message or doesn't fit the mold and is not playing the game of the much larger billions of dollars industries that are the key players. What can we do in the next, 11 months, Marianne?
Well, first of all, I so appreciate your obvious deep understanding of what's going on here below the surface. And you mentioned the Me Too movement, you mentioned the abuse of women, the sexual harassment of women, and you mentioned that extraordinarily relevant line from Martin Luther King, we will in the end not remember the words of our enemies, we will also remember the silence of our friends. We have gotten as a society that when a woman is being sexually harassed, someone should speak up. But there are different kinds of ways that a woman can be harassed. Mm-hmm. There are different kinds of ways that a woman can be abused. And mocking her, telling lies about her in the public sphere. Remember, women didn't used to be in the public sphere as much as we are now, so this is relatively new. And when lies are repeated about a woman, narratives just continue to be extended when there's no fact-checking on it, and it's just said over and over again. Speaking up, it's a form of bullying.
Absolutely.
It's a form of bullying. It's a form of abuse. And the saddest part for me, Vic, is how many times women are the abusers. I mean, I've experienced some things and I thought, wow, I bet that woman thinks of herself as a feminist.
Yeah, sometimes the enemy is from within, too.
Well, it always is. It always is, including in all of us. I've looked at myself with so much of this because in the Course in Miracles, it says that only if you take 100% responsibility for your experience will you be able to change it. So I've had to certainly look deeply at myself. What part did I play, etc. But I think there are two things that bring up other people's darkness, your darkness, but also your light. And I think it's kind of like when you're at an airport. If you see something, say something.
Right.
I think that when you say, what can we do? We all need to speak up now. And your image of the bully was really, really true. Somebody else is being bullied, and it's what I'd said before. Somebody else is being mocked. You're afraid if you stand up for them, you'll be bullied or you'll be mocked. This is not the time for silence. Yeah. This is the time for speaking our truths in times and in places where it's convenient, and in times and in places where it is inconvenient. That is the only way we will make it through these very, very turbulent waters.
I completely agree. It's time to put away people-pleasing.
Thank you. It's so funny that you say that, because that's exactly what I talk about all the time. It's a politics of people-pleasing. And I say to audiences on this campaign, I'm not here to say to you what I think you want to hear. You know, these politicians, and by the way, I'd like to make a distinction between the candidates and the system.
Right.
Because I've been running for president. I've gotten to know a lot of these people. The candidates, the vast majority of the candidates, very lovely people. They're victims of it too. So this is not about the candidates, my critique here. It's about the system and the container for all of this. That's
right.
Very different. It's very important to me. But politicians they go into a situation and they're told, this is what you say that blacks want to hear. This is what you say that gay people want to hear. This is what you say that women want to hear, et cetera. And to me, we have to talk to each other right now as Americans. You're gay and you're American. You're Jewish and you're American. You're black and you're American. You're woman and you're American. All of the individual identities that are in trouble because America's in trouble. So I say to audiences so often, I'm not here to tell you what somebody told me you want to hear. I'm here to talk to you as adults about how we must come together now and think about what is happening in our country and what we must do to change things so that future generations will be able to experience the blessings of this democracy. And I feel there's a listening for that. I feel there's a deep listening for that, and that's all the more reason why it is so disturbing that there are forces out there who seek to manipulate and even suppress the democratic process because they think they know better. It's very paternalistic. It's not democracy. It's this paternalism of we know what would be best for people, so we're going to try to herd them into a particular view of things.
This is Vic Gerami at The Blunt Post with Vic on KPFK, and I am speaking with presidential candidate Marianne Williamson, discussing her campaign, the road she's been on, and 2020 spirituality. So we'll be right back after this break.
An exceptional way to support KPFK is by donating your old vehicle to the station. Whether it's operational or not, you receive a tax write-off, and we retain a portion of the funds to keep KPFK powered by the people. To donate, please call 877-KPFK-AUTO. That is 877-KPFK-AUTO.
When you sign up as a KPFK Sustainer Circle member, that $10 helps to pay for daily broadcasts of Democracy Now!, Sojourner Truth with Margaret Prescott, and all of the news and information you hear on KPFK, including on my own show, Rising Up with Sonali. You get a lot for your monthly contribution, and we need that gift right now to keep bringing you all the programs you count on. $10 makes a big impact. We combine it with contributions from your fellow listeners who rely on KPFK as much as you do. Public radio only works with you. Contribute now. Go to kpfk.org/support, then click Sustainer Circle. Whatever you can do, please do.
Hey, LA, this is Stephanie Miller. Join me for news updates, snappy political satire, and commentary on all the crazy. Start your day with the Stephanie Miller Show at 6 a.m. on 90.7 KPFK.
KPFK 90.7 FM. You're listening to The Blunt Post with Vic, presidential candidate Marianne Williamson in the studio. And, Marianne is spiritually, she talks about so many different things, and she's so versed in so many different things. As admittedly, I'll get some heat for saying this, but I've been sober for over 11 years, and I'm always very impressed by her astute about 12 steps in AA. And she was talking about making good for the wrongs and your character defects, which in AA would be a fourth step. And then we also have the ninth step, or eighth step and a ninth step in AA, which is about making amends. And that's what we haven't done to the African-American community which is to make amends and make good so that we can sort of have a clean slate.
I think that's an interesting particular issue today because there's a lot of talk about investigating your own white privilege. And that inner work is important. But integrative politics, which is what we need now, includes both inner and outer change. Martin Luther King talked about how we need quantitative shifts in our circumstances and also qualitative shifts in our souls. So if you took $1,000 from me, I would appreciate the apology, but I would also like my money back.
Right.
So I've been doing ritualistic apologies, white America to black America, for decades. But the issue of amends is absolutely correct. You need to atone, and where possible, you need to make amends. It's not either or, it's both and.
Absolutely.
And one of the reasons I feel strongly about reparations as opposed to just race-based policies is because race-based policies does... It speaks to the financial restitution, but it doesn't carry the kind of psychological and emotional and moral authority that reparations do, because reparations contain an inherent mea culpa, an inherent acknowledgement of a wrong that was done by one people against another, a recognition on the part of the descendants of those people that a debt exists, a debt is owed, and willingness on the part of that people to pay the debt. That is what will interrupt the pattern and free our future in ways that will not otherwise be accomplished.
Amen. And it's the holiday season. And also, this is a time, I tell people this, and they always laugh and say, if, we don't, I'm in so many 12 programs, and one of them is Codependence Anonymous, but this is a time when we can afford to be a little codependent because we do have to push our friends and family, just about everything. Just talk to them and get them to donate, register them, pressure them to register. It's just, there's so much at stake. And most of us, not Marianne, but most of the rest of us sort of know only the tip of the iceberg of what happens. And I always tell friends or whomever, they repeat things they hear on CNN or MSNBC. I'm not even going to get into Fox. And I always just tell them there's so much more than that. Just because a big network says it doesn't mean it's the whole story. If you really want to know the whole story.
Or if it's even true.
Or if it's, yeah, absolutely.
And I always would have agreed with you, but now I more than agree with you. I know what you're saying is true.
Yeah, and it's very easy because when you think about the enormity of it and when you think about the power of it, it becomes overwhelming and kind of daunting and sad. Again, in my 12 steps, we always go back and say, let's stay in the solution because we just can't give into it. Otherwise, we're going to get...
If you're going to be in the solution, that means you have to support the solution.
Absolutely.
And if you find someone, whether it's me or anyone else, it's everybody you have to look into your own conscience, but whoever the candidate is you feel is the solution, give support, volunteer, and send money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all need to do a little bit more than we have been doing.
I think that's so true, Vic. I feel that way. I've been saying that for a long time now, that I felt in the last few years that there are so many ways in which enough of us are now where we need to be. Enough of us are now doing what we need to do. Just step it up.
Yeah.
A lot of people finally, we've gotten to the point, okay, I'm who I need to be enough, doing what I should be doing enough, just step it up. Now, everybody, step it up. That has been my feeling for a long time, and it's really true politically.
I mean, on one hand, you think anyone who hasn't been under a rock, has watched the last 3 years, would be in a state of anxiety of what can I do? What are we doing? What's the plan? But just to think that the rest of us for the next 11 months have so much work to do because so much is at stake. I mean, between our foreign policy, between the economy and healthcare, Social Security, so many things are all of a sudden, they are at jeopardy all over again. I mean, LGBT rights, we made such great strides. We gained so much during President Obama, and we've lost some of that. The trans community has been targeted. There's a trans military ban. And they keep chipping away. And now healthcare.
You just said something that's very important. When you talk about the trans community now, you're not just talking about a community denied equal protection. It's worse than that. It's a community that is in some ways actually targeted. This is so huge, and serious people have to do serious thinking. So that, for instance, when I've talked about this as president, we need a president who will not only make sure that population is protected, but given special protection. Special protection means an acknowledgement on the part of law enforcement that there is special risk associated here. And this is where politics matters, because that can make all the difference between whether or not people have the protection that they need from law enforcement and other institutions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The trans community is targeted, and they were the easiest targets for the current administration. And I always say, and I'm repeating someone, I forget who said it, said the LGBT rights movement is about one thing and one thing only, and that's the right to be average. And that means that we don't necessarily want special rights or separate rights, but at times, as Marianne said, it's necessary to put it on paper because it means protections.
You know, I remember many, many years ago when the conversation first started about marriage equality. And that's another thing. I remember when even Obama, people like that were taking too long to get there. Well, marriage between a man and a woman, all that crap. I mean, it was ridiculous, I felt. But I remember being on Larry King's show and talking in defense of marriage equality very, very early on. And I remember how I had been changed. Not that I was ever against it, but the thing that really made me more proactively, no, you need to say something, because that's really what we're talking. You know, I often talk about the difference between being anti-slavery and being abolitionist. Anti-slavery means you're against it, but you don't necessarily say anything. Abolitionist means not on my watch. So the thing that shifted me from being just like, oh, I think gay people should be able to get married, versus, no, you're a public figure and you need to talk about this, was when a gay friend of mine said, we're always told, you're just not normal, you're just not normal. And here we want to do the most normal thing in the world.
Right.
All we're asking, like when you're talking about being average, we want to do something could not be more normal. Right. And we're being told we can't. And that just really, really, that was it for me.
Absolutely. And we have, I've grown in areas. And we've all kind of learned, and even in LGBT rights and LGBT social justice, I always tell people, because I have heterosexual friends who are sort of very cautious, in a good way, to say the right words and terms and names and labels. And I always tell them, listen, as a gay man, I'm in the middle of it, right? And you would think that I'm updated on everything, but even I make mistakes. So the point I'm trying to make is, we all sort of learn and evolve and change. And, important thing is to really listen to people and see where they're coming from. And why if you just think about that, would we not want a spiritual person in the White House, a spiritual person to lead our country at a time when we need that more than an economist, or we need that more than someone someone that can change look at our foreign policy. It's a mess. It's a joke, literally a joke. If you haven't seen it, go on YouTube. It's a time when we all need it. I know that when all the tools in the world are not helping me through something, the last place I go to, which is, it shouldn't be the last place, but it's the one that helps me at the end of the day, is spirituality.
JFK said we cannot afford to be materially rich and spiritually poor.
Love that.
All that spirituality is the path of the heart. And I think the average American is guided in our individual behavior by at least an effort to act according to the dictates of our conscience. And what we're talking about here is that public policy should also be guided by dictates of conscience and integrity and compassion and mercy and justice. And when you have public policy that is more often guided by the dictate of short-term profit maximization for corporate entities, then that's far too often at the expense of conscience, ethics, integrity, and any level of reverence for life or for planet, for human beings, for other species. And that divergence today between the basic goodness and decency of the average American and decency and dignity in American policy, international as well as domestic, that's a gap that it is the moral challenge of our generation to close.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the clips from my interview with Marianne Williamson. She's a treasure, and I'm so glad that she is in the conversation. And even though she suspended her campaign, she made a great mark in this 2020 campaign and the conversations. And of course, we human beings are very resistant to change, especially a change that's so great as the message that Marianne Williamson has. I remember the first time I went to hear her many years ago at the Saban Theater, and one of the things she said, which I think was from her book, her first book, Return to Love, was, it's a long quote, but she said something like, who are you to play small? And those who read Marianne Williamson know what that comes from. And I was just so inspired by her. So to see her run for president was very exciting, and now she is supporting Senator Sanders, and I'm just very grateful that I had the chance to talk to her right here at KPFK, and I hope you enjoyed that. So I interviewed one of our notable congressmen from California, Congressman Ted Lieu from the 33rd Congressional District, for today's show. It was an honor and a privilege to do that. And we had a long discussion about the impeachment, Donald Trump. Congressman Lieu was very candid about that, and congressional oversight in general going forward. We talked about the 2020 census and why that's important, and everyone should be paying attention to that. And something that I've sort of watched and followed for many years, and that is the congressman's bill to ban gay conversion therapy. And something that he introduced many years ago that, saw California being the first state to ban gay conversion therapy, and now his bill on a federal level. And then, of course, we talked about the coronavirus. So I will let you hear the interview. Congressman Lieu, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me on the Blunt Post with Vic. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan, and I'm very excited to have you on the show. And KPFK, I'm sure listeners are getting a great treat to talk about so many different topics that are happening. There's so much happening right now. But before we get into that, I do want to do a little intro for some of our listeners who may not know some of the, your credentials, the biggest parts, because there's so much. So I'm going to do this really quickly. Congressman Lieu represents the 33rd Congressional District. He is serving his third term in Congress and is currently he sits on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was elected by his Democratic colleagues to serve as co-chair of the Democratic Party and Communications Committee. Congressman Lieu has been a leader in Congress against ethnic and racial profiling and discrimination against the LGBTQIA community. He serves as whip of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, vice chair of the LGBTQIA Equality Caucus, and co-chair of the Cloud Computing Caucus. How was that? Did I do that justice?
That was way too much, but it was great.
You're the American dream. You're a product of immigration. We're so lucky to have someone of your stature in our state, in our great state of California.
Thank you.
So, Congressman, just so that we sort of address the obvious, and you don't have to go into it in detail, but just your perspective and how do you reflect on what happened with the impeachment in the House and the aftermath in Senate and where it stands now?
The evidence was overwhelming that Donald Trump committed crimes and that these were impeachable offenses. The House impeachment power worked as intended. Unfortunately, the Senate's removal power did not work. And that's because, to me, the Republican senators acted like a quivering mass of jelly. They simply bowed down to whatever Donald Trump wanted. And justice was not done, and it was a fake trial. I mean, whoever heard of a trial with no witnesses and documents?
Right.
That's exactly what happened in the Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. That was just such a farce. I don't think any American would have that kind of privilege to have that kind of trial. But all we can do is do our best, and I know that you and Congressman Schiff and many others did what you had to do, and the House was able to impeach President Trump. So glad we talked about that. I want to go into just Trump oversight and see if you want to elaborate on that and what you and your colleagues are doing going forward. U.S.
Congress has as one of its primary responsibilities oversight of both the executive branch and the judicial branch. It's inherent in our separation of powers. And the House has been doing oversight before impeachment. We did it while impeachment was happening. We're going to continue to do it after impeachment. It's especially important now because of the failure of the Senate to do justice. It's really up to the American people in November to decide whether they want to remove Donald Trump from office. And I believe we need to continue to give the American people as much information as possible about any misconduct being committed either by the president or other people in his administration.
Absolutely. Well said. Congressman, I'm a gay man, and I'm a huge fan of yours for many reasons, one of which being that you've been a great ally to the LGBTQIA community, and Pride season is coming up. And for those who may not be aware of, you were a pioneer in banning gay conversion, as it's called sometimes, gay conversion therapy in the state of California. You introduced it in 2012. Now you have your efforts, you're taking it to a federal level. So can you tell us about that?
Yes. So-called gay conversion therapy is not only fraudulent, but in some cases it could cause harm to the patient, including depression, anxiety, and even suicide.
Right.
Very pleased that I authored the first law in the nation to ban gay conversion therapy for minors. Very pleased that 19 states have now followed suit. Most recently, the red state of Utah did it. And so it's very exciting to see progress happen in both red and blue states. And I've introduced federal legislation that will ban it not only in the entire nation, but also ban it for adults as well. One reason we chose to do it for minors is because states under the legal framework have particular powers to protect minors. At the federal level, we do have additional powers that allow us to ban this for adults as well. So that's what we're working on, and hopefully we can get it through.
That's great that you clarified that, because I was wondering about that too. And it's such an important topic. And as you mentioned, Utah banning it, that's a really big deal. So we will be following that as it progresses. And I also want to talk about the census, which is coming up. And I know that that's something that's very important to you. And, no matter what we say, some segments of the community don't really take it as seriously as they should. So if you can talk to your constituents and just listeners about the importance of census and participating.
The U.S. Census is critically important for a number of reasons. First, it determines the amount of federal funding to local schools, cities, as well as the state of California. Estimates are that for every person not counted, the local jurisdiction will lose $2,000 per person per year. So over 10 years, that's $20,000. You can imagine that if hundreds of thousands or even millions of people are undercounted or not counted in California, that's a lot of money. that we will lose out on. And this applies to not just schools, but also your public safety departments, as well as healthcare programs. So it's extremely important for funding. It also determines a number of representatives that represent California in D.C. 10 years ago, California did not lose any congressional seats, and it was about a difference of 100 or 50,000 or so people or less. So with different projections of this census, it could be a matter of 40,000 people filling that form out or not that would determine whether we, in fact, lose a congressional seat. And that's also very important. So I urge everyone to fill out the census. The information you provide to the census cannot be shared with any other agency, because if the census employee does that, they could go to prison. And in addition, there is no citizenship question on this data. It's all confidential. It's only used just for the census, and it only takes about 60 seconds to fill out.
Thank you for that, Congressman. So if I may put you on the spot for a second, are there any presidential candidates that are your favorites at this time? Can you share?
I am enthusiastically neutral.
Okay, I like that. I appreciate that. And
I think any of them are clearly superior to Donald Trump.
Right? Isn't that the truth? Vote blue no matter who. I really like that slogan. Congressman, before we leave, anything else you want to share, you want to talk about that I haven't brought up that's really important to you?
That I think the coronavirus outbreak is expanding in other countries, and we got our first case in Northern California of a patient who contracted the coronavirus who had not traveled to China. In fact, we don't really know where he got the coronavirus from. And with cases skyrocketing in Italy and in Europe, we have to be on guard here in the United States. So the House of Representatives, we're going to reject the cuts in Donald Trump budget to the Centers for Disease Control and to the National Institutes of Health. Instead, we're going to pass a robust supplemental funding package to fight the coronavirus and make sure we're prepared if the cases were to increase in the United States.
Great. So it sounds like the House is very proactive in dealing with this. That's good to hear. I'm sure a lot of our listeners would be comforted by what you said. So, Congressman, I'm grateful for your time. I don't want to take any more of it. Just want to thank you and just say that the LGBTQI community always thinks of you, especially now that we're leading up to Pride, for our champions such as yourself. So thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much.
So that was Congressman Ted Lieu of California. I thank him for the interview, and I found him to be very surprising. It was a great interview. He was at times very, diplomatic and just matter of fact, and at times very candid and very didn't hold anything back. So I really enjoyed that interview, and I'm grateful for that. And I look forward to seeing him doing all the great things that he's doing. So thank you, Congressman. So, as I said at the beginning of the program, I like to acknowledge and talk about not just people who do great work, but also organizations. And sometimes, it's obviously people who are in charge of those organizations. So for today, I want to talk to you about a local organization called You Matter Not Alone. And You Matter Not Alone is a suicide prevention and suicide awareness charity right here in Los Angeles, and it was founded by Donna Quach. Donna Quach is now a retired military lieutenant, Army lieutenant, and she's also a clinical psychotherapist, and founded this organization because she saw alarming rates of suicide in the country, especially with veterans, and wanted to do something. And her team of her clinical team and volunteers, all pro bono, They go to schools. They go to different organizations, colleges, and talk about suicide prevention and awareness, bullying. And they have groups, peer groups, and many other programs, very grassroots, that does really good work. Donna is an extraordinary person. What she does, so many different things, and it's all completely pro bono, her work with You Matter Not Alone. So if you want to learn more, you can go to their website, which is youmatter-notalone.org. So that's our organization to highlight today. So before we go, I want to say a big thanks to my producer, Ricky Herrera, without whom the show would not be possible, believe me. And Ricky also composed and produced the original theme music for this show, so I'm very grateful to have Ricky on this team. And I would also like to thank our program director, Kevin Fleming, for his leadership and guidance through this whole thing. And of course, last but not least, our station manager, Aniel Fields, for making all of this possible. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me today for the Blunt Post with Vic on KPFK. I hope that you tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. I will have another interview. And in the meantime, if you'd like more information, please visit thebluntpost.com or kpfk.org. So I will leave you with this on this Monday morning. If nothing changes, nothing changes.